Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
As we have the voice of Sean Casten, the Democratic congressman from Illinois, shares part of Chicago. He was with us at the DNC. And Congressman, it's great to see you here. I hope you had a great holiday. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. I have a lot of questions for you because you've been a busy guy lately with regard to government funding, with regard to the Ethics Committee report into Matt Gaetz. But I want to start with you on this issue that we're talking about now. When you go to chicago.gov, your town, says the city has shouldered the responsibility of caring for more than 49,000 immigrants, new arrivals, seeking asylum, many flown to Chicago from states like Texas. What will happen to them when Donald Trump takes office?
Well, it's important to understand where these folks come from. There were a surge of immigrants when Greg Abbott was busing people up from Texas. But if you look nationally, and Chicago's no different, the overwhelming majority of the undocumented folks in our country are not people who snuck across the border, no matter how much we might like to sort of fall for that lazy stereotype. They're people who came here legally and overstayed a visa. Maybe it's a student who studied here. Maybe they fell in love while they were studying here and had a child. There are people who had temporary work visas, and then the temporary work visas weren't renewed. In many cases, your prior guest, maybe they're less so in Chicago, but certainly downstate Illinois. They're farm workers who we depend on to grow our food, but our programs have not provided support for these people. So to tell those people, the average undocumented person in this country has been here for 12 years. And again, most of that is visa overstays. To tell these people who are contributing to America, who are paying taxes, who in many cases may be married or living with American citizens, that we're going to break up your family. I mean, you could not be more anti-family than that. And it's creating a lot of nervousness all across the country, not just in Chicago.
Well, so what will be Democrats' posture on the issue of Dreamers? Then you're describing some of them in this conversation, Congressman, knowing that Republicans were elected in part, Donald Trump elected in part due to his approach to the border. Dreamers weren't even mentioned in the Senate deal on the border that never, of course, became law earlier this year, one that Donald Trump did not want to see passed. Will they be included in this debate in the new Congress?
Well, look, let me speak to this from the perspective of the House. Yes, Donald Trump won the election. The House gained seats. We picked up 2 seats in the last election. And so you've got a lot of people, on my side of the aisle who are pretty confident that people liked what we were selling. And we are in a rapidly growing economy. I have yet to meet an employer in the last 3 years who isn't saying we have a real problem finding qualified people. The CBO said that part of the reason why inflation in the United States came down so much faster than other countries is because we have had a growth in net immigration to this country. So if you want inflation to be down, if you want to make sure that employers can find workers, we need to make sure that we have a humane, robust immigration system that continues to attract the best and brightest. And what I think all of us are telling our Republican colleagues is to go read Ronald Reagan's farewell speech, when he said that I've always seen America as a great shining city on a hill, and if it must have walls, make sure it has doors and windows so that those with the means and ability can come inside. That's the message we need to remind people of, because that's the only thing that has ever really made America great.
This is a conversation that will clearly continue in the new Congress, as will be the one about government funding here. You barely got this done to avoid a Christmas shutdown, Congressman. It was, of course, late Friday. The continuing resolution was passed to fund the government through the 14th of March. What happens on March 15th when this resolution has expired?
I joked with one of my Republican colleagues in the elevator. He said, what are we doing here today? And I said, well, that can doesn't kick itself down the road. That's why we had to be here today. And it's sort of funny, but it's also not funny, right? Because over the last 2 years of Republican control in Congress, they've never really managed to put together an appropriations package other than one where the terms were dictated by the Democrats, either through a continuing resolution that the Democrats carried across the line, or through the deal that McCarthy negotiated with Biden that essentially locked in the funding levels we had set in the last term with some minor adjustments. And so the question will be, with a much thinner Republican majority, can they get on line between their sort of extreme right wing that would happily shut the government down and wants to massively cut the government services, and their more moderate and in many cases more numerate, reasonable wing who has opposed those tensions. And that fight has bedeviled the Republican caucus for this whole term. I think you'll continue to find that Democrats are willing to work constructively with those Republicans on a bipartisan basis, as we have, but we'll have to see what they bring together. There's, I like to remind people that there were 2 fistfights in the House this last term. They all involved Republicans, and trying to figure out how they're going to get along together is going to be a challenge for this next term, at least in the House.
Well, when we consider what was left out, and, I know a lot of Democrats were heartened to see the request for emergency funding for hurricane relief put back in, but we didn't see year-round sale of E15 gasoline, the crackdown on PBMs that we heard about. Also, restrictions on investments in China, Congressman. Some Democrats like Rosa DeLauro, like Jim McGovern of Massachusetts, said that's the real reason Elon Musk opposed this, because of the amount of business that he does in China through Tesla and other entities. Do you agree?
There's a lot of smoke there. Whether there's fire, I think we need to do some more investigating. But that, I serve on the Financial Services Committee, and Patrick McHenry and Andy Barr were really great sponsors of figuring out how to manage that outbound investment. There's a real concern on the Republican side of the aisle with what we are doing to send U.S. technology to our adversaries, and how are we controlling that, especially technology that has national security implications. And yes, there is huge concern that Mr. Musk weighed in so heavily against that. And I would hope that the fact that there was such bipartisan support for that provision will also lead to some bipartisan oversight support to ask some questions to understand what's going on there. But yes, it is it's concerning. We spend so much time in classified and unclassified settings trying to track where U.S. generated IP is going, and I'd rather not get in a fight with the White House about whether we should give in that intellectual property to our adversaries.
Well, I'll tell you, last time you were with us, Congressman, you were about to go to the floor of the House with a privileged resolution to force the release of the Ethics Committee report into now former Congressman Matt Gaetz. That report has been released. It came out Monday morning, and it is quite a salacious read. I can't say some of this stuff even on the air as I read from the report. Gaetz is now threatening to show up next week to claim the seat for which he was elected. If that happens, and I don't know if you're hearing anything about this, Congressman, should he be sworn in?
Gaetz doesn't have that option. Gaetz formally submitted his notice not to run in the 119th Congress. Recall Ron DeSantis initiated the special election so that they can go through and hold that. The deadline to file to run that election has passed, and they're printing ballots. So, Matt Gaetz is trying to get on the news. Given, as you mentioned, the salacious details in that report, if I were in Matt Gaetz's shoes, I would be trying to keep a lower profile and not have people looking in to find out that, he paid for sex with 17-year-old girls. If people want to talk about that, we'll talk about that. But he does not have a way to become a member of the next Congress. He just has a way to talk and get on television.
You must be glad that it's been released now that it's public.
I think glad is probably the wrong word. I'm glad that the Ethics Committee stood up for ethics in Congress. I'm glad that, we're hearing that at least 2 Republicans on the Ethics Committee voted to release that. And it's not because we're trying to, hurt one of our former colleagues. It's because the House has to comport itself in an ethical way that attracts the respect of the American people, regardless of how they vote. And when we hold ourselves accountable, when we hold members accountable for these sorts of actions, we basically send a message to the American people that we care about this institution and we love this institution. And that's the important thing of releasing this report.
It's great to have you today, Congressman. I hope you had a great holiday. Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah to all of your constituents in the Chicago area.